Hey everybody, welcome back to the Keep It Simple podcast. If you're catching this, you're with us for episode 28. And today we have our family member, really, truly a family member, Stephen Landreth, on the show. Many of you, kind of our core nucleus, are very well familiar with Stephen. And for those of you who are not, you get the treat of being introduced to him today and hearing some of his story. Stephen was one of mine. Had him from the beginning of middle school all the way throughout, many stages, ages, phases, and just so incredibly proud of the man that he is. And Navy. Stephen is in the U.S. Navy. I've got it written down here. He is a surface warfare officer, but he broke that down for me to help me understand that he drives ships and he fights ships. He's currently stationed in Everett, Washington, which is just outside of Seattle, but today he's in a hotel room in Norfolk, Virginia, where he's finishing up some training. So, Stephen, thanks so much, man, for making it a point to come on, carving out time for us. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's such a blessing to be asked to be on this. It's great.
Yeah, you look fantastic. So I told you when you first popped on here, right before we hit record, I'm like, dude, you look good. You look freaking amazing. It's so good to see your face. You look happy and healthy, and that makes me incredibly happy. Freaking crap. So here's the thing, legal disclaimer. We should just right off the bat. So it's turkey season here in Missouri. Okay. Yesterday was opening day. And so it's been 4:30 a.m. days back to back. Ooh. And so it's which is not that big of a deal, but it's like hustle out, hunt, and then sprint back, grab a shower, change clothes, and then to work, and then work all day. And many of you know I'm not eloquent of speech anyway. And so if I get to bum stumbling a little bit today, just offer a little mercy. So I kind of gave the nuts and bolts of, Navy, warfare officer, Everett, Washington, but kind of beneath the surface, what are you up to? Like, how are you? Where are you? What's going on? Just kind of an update.
Yeah, so one, how am I? I'm phenomenal right now. I'm really great. Praise the Lord. Mm-hmm. So we can get into it. Graduated in 21, right from the Naval Academy. I did a few months of training, and then I was on a ship for 2 years. And now I'm getting ready to go. I'm actually going back to the same ship, but right now I'm in training again. So in December, I left the ship, went home for New Year's, and then went on training. And so I was in Rhode Island for a bit, went back to Washington. Now I'm in Virginia. And so that's really, really rapid fire where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
But the reason why I'm doing so well, one, God's been working a lot on me. I've got a lot of free time. And that's another reason, I don't have work, really. I mean, I go to school for like 4 hours a day. So stress is really low. I've got a lot of free time. So naturally my spirits are really high. We hope they last for a long time, but who knows, I'll go back to the ship and I just get back to the grind and I'll be down in the dumps. But right now, a lot of free time, just living it up and having a good time, resting before I have to go back. So,
yeah. So on a ship for 2 years, where all can you say? I mean, where all have you been? Literally, like around the world. Where all have you gotten to travel? Travel is a loose term. You're working, but but you get to see the world. Like, where all have you been?
So, so graduated 21, did a few months of training, and then went home for Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I came back to the ship and immediately left for deployment.
Okay.
So I think December 31st we left for deployment, I want to say, of 21.
Okay.
So, and I was gone for about 8 months. I didn't come back to the States until August 11th.
Wow.
And that whole time we went, I'd been to Australia, which was really cool. Australia was a blast. I've been to Guam. I didn't really see much of Guam. We just kind of pulled in for a day, like got some fuel and stuff. Been to some of the like American Samoa, Fiji, pulled in, but I didn't go out to. Been to Japan for a long time, for about a month in total.
Wow.
South Korea for like 4 days. I was in Hawaii for like a week or two.
Yeah.
And then most of my time has been like in Washington or San Diego.
Yeah.
But I have been kind of hopping around in the Pacific for a little bit. Our deployment was to just east of China. So.
Okay. Wow. So much there. So, I'm proud of you. I've always been, I was thinking, this must have been yesterday maybe, just kind of thinking about you.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say this about a lot of people. There's never been a time that I wasn't proud of you.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. I mean, yesterday I was kind of had time to think, and I was thinking through, and I was like, kind of just, freeze framing through years and ages and stages and phases, and, from the, from the little gangly penguin hat wearing fella, all the way up to the man of steel today. I've just always been incredibly proud of you. So one of the texts, you do an old man's heart good. You are probably one of the most faithful, if not the most faithful, at staying in touch. And it's nothing over the top. It's always just a touch point. It's the other day at Easter, at Christmas for sure. You don't ever miss Christmas. But then just sporadically through a year, you'll drop a text. And one of the happiest texts was a picture of you and Eli, Doug, the artist formerly known as Eli, in Hawaii. And so was he stationed in Hawaii and you ported there, or how did that work?
So.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I was on deployment and we pulled into Hawaii at the last half in July, I don't know how I found this out, but he was in Hawaii. I think maybe I'd seen him in Warner Robins at one point, and I figured out he was going to Hawaii, and so I was out there and I sent him a text, and we met up. And we actually went skydiving together.
That's what it was. That was the text you sent me. Yeah.
We went skydiving together.
Wow.
So I think I just remember him telling me that he was stationed in Hawaii, and so I was there for about a week and hit him up, and we hung out a few times and had a blast. Yeah.
So is he in the Navy as well?
No, Doug is in the Air Force.
Air Force.
Yeah, he does like JTAC. I think that's like a tactical air controller.
Okay.
Yeah. So he'll like.
Does he go by as an adult, like as a full-grown man? Which I imagine he's been a full-grown man since he was in 8th grade.
Yeah.
As a full-grown man, does he go by Doug or Eli?
Oh man, I mean that was coming on 2 years ago when I last saw him. So I think he was going by Eli at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still called him. Yeah. I still called him Doug when I showed up, and he's like, "Oh, I haven't heard Doug since high school." So,
yeah. Oh my, cool. So, I guess a great starting point is talking about life being complicated and faith doesn't have to be. I imagine when you're living on a ship for the majority of 2 years, there are certainly pros and cons. I personally can't imagine living on a ship for 2 years. How in the world do you practice the Christian faith on a ship for 2 years? I mean, do you have chapels? Do you have chaplains? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's pretty tough. I'll caveat first by saying I was attached to the ship for 2 years, but obviously, like when we're in port, I've got an apartment out in town. I just go stay in.
Okay.
Yeah, so Of the 2 years that I was on the ship, I spent maybe I was pretty fortunate that first tour. I mean, in total, I think I was actually out at sea for maybe 9, 10 months out of a 2 year
Okay.
stint.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so there's that. But yeah, so it is pretty difficult. We don't have a chapel.
Okay.
Um, Carriers will have chapels. They'll have
Okay.
dedicated spaces, but I'm on a destroyer, what we call small boys.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
destroyer.
we
Lil Steve on the small boy.
yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Uh,
Yeah, so on the small boys, we don't have chapels, and we're lucky if we have a chaplain.
mm,
Um, I was very fortunate to have a chaplain and a good chaplain at that.
okay.
Um, yeah, so he was phenomenal, really
Hmm.
faithful, um, loved the Lord, loved what he did, and was super faithful. And if realistically, if it wasn't for him, I don't know. Not that I like wouldn't have made it, but it certainly would have made the going that much more challenging.
Hmm.
Um, just because if I had, we didn't do this all the time, but I tried my best to meet up with him at least once a week. Just carve out, an hour and just sometimes I'd just sit in his office and just be like, his name is Keith. And you were, before we started, you were talking about, people that impacted you most, and Keith was certainly one of them. And
Amen,
sometimes I
man.
just come in and be like, Keith, like, oh, this stuff happened, like, oh, my day's just terrible and just blah blah blah. But some days, we'd have a Bible study and we'd talk about scripture and stuff. But um, so to get back to your question, we had a chaplain, and he certainly made it much more manageable and was
Hmm.
encouraging.
Hmm.
As far as others on the ship that had a faith life and in the community aspect,
Hmm.
um, only a small handful.
Okay.
And then among that handful, excuse me, uh, being an officer, this kind of like officer enlisted relationship. There was maybe we had 300 people on the ship, 40 or so officers, and there was maybe one or two other officers that were like devout Christians. um, and uh, one of them devout Christian, but he was Catholic, and the
Okay.
chaplain that we had was like Presbyterian,
Okay.
and so all the services that we would do were like Protestant, and so my buddy that was Catholic like wouldn't come to the services. So it was just kind of like me and the chaplain really for the most part. Like he was kind of the only guy that I would really interact with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, really the like what would do it for me, what would kind of get me through like the hard days is I'd wait for nighttime, like I'd wait for like my night watch when I'm up on the bridge.
Hmm.
And if I was having like I would write like hymns or scriptures like in my little notepad. And at night when it's just quiet and we're just, driving somewhere, I would just get out on the bridge wing and I would just, look at the stars and like sing a hymn or like read some scripture that I had written down. Um, so that's a lot. I don't know. I think that answered your
No,
question.
it's perfect, dude.
Um,
That's worship. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Praise God for Keith.
yeah,
The way that knowing you, the way that I do, and knowing, you are a social person. And so, you know, relationally, communally, especially coming from A, your family, B, our church, C, our youth group,
yeah,
um, and then being on a boat with 300 head and there being this tiny little um, kind of community of faith. I would think that would be hard. Was that hard?
yeah. It was certainly challenging.
Yeah.
And now that I'm, bringing back memories, there were a few others that were actually very dear to me. So there was the chaplain.
Hmm.
Um, there was my good friend. Her name's Ashley.
Hmm.
I actually just went to her wedding in October, which was a
Sweet.
blessing.
Yeah.
And she was a pretty strong Christian. And then another, he was our navigator. He was a strong Christian.
Awesome,
Um,
man.
but and again, that helped, but just between the busyness of your work schedule and
Yeah.
having to drive the ship, and me as a new guy, I don't know what's going on. I'm having to learn all the systems, learn all the engineering plants and stuff, and
Hmm.
so I had I had a small community,
Hmm.
but the times that I could really lean into that community um, was few and far between.
Hmm.
So it was certainly a challenge because the community is smaller. Now my time is really stretched thin.
Yeah.
So
So two options. You can pick an
okay,
option.
okay.
Navy or Pacific Northwest. Which one? Where you want to go first? Navy or Pacific Northwest?
Let's do the Pac Northwest, as we say.
Okay. So stigma, true or false? Um, Pacific Northwest is just kind of pagan is way too harsh of a word,
Hmm.
but extremely loose, right? And so, as a person that's never really spent a lot of time up there,
Yeah.
like I read Donald Miller's Blue Like Jazz, right? And
Okay.
so you get a fundamental Christian that intentionally moves to the Pacific Northwest to go to school, and because of that kind of loose and anything goes, different people who I have talked to who have spent any amount of time up there say that Christians are for sure the minority. Um, what has been your lived experience in the Pacific Northwest? Is that stigma valid or not? And then what does worship look like? Do you have a church off base, on base? What does that look, what does church, if you
Mhm.
will, what does that look like out there?
Yeah, for sure. For the stigma, I would probably say that it's warranted. Like I would agree. Um,
Hmm.
I will say though, on the flip side of that, and this is from my, pretty small experience being in the Pacific Northwest,
Sure.
Christians are Christians are certainly the minority, but if you
Hmm.
find a Christian, they're serious. I
Hmm.
mean, in the South, it's
Yeah.
the Bible Belt. People are, and I hate to say it, but we're Christian by association.
No, yeah, I'm with you. Yes.
But in the Pacific Northwest, if someone is Christian, they are usually pretty serious about it.
They
Um,
are a follower of Christ, like a
yeah,
practitioner.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
what I'll say is my what I have experienced personally.
Hmm.
Um, for my church, I go to two churches actually.
I would
Um,
expect no less.
so uh, I leave Georgia and I'm in college for a bit, and uh, Brian was looking at all of his churches and stuff and going around, and he kind of looked into Anglican churches and was like, hey, I see this Anglican church is pretty similar to Methodist, and I think you might like it. And when I was going out to the Pacific Northwest, there's like no Methodist churches really out there.
Yeah.
And so I looked into some Anglican churches, and one of
Hmm.
them, the reason why I go to two churches, I go to two Anglican churches, and one of them meets on Saturday
Okay.
because they meet in a Baptist church, and so while the
Oh,
Baptists have their service on Sunday, they have their service on Saturday evening.
okay.
So I go to that one, and then I've got another larger, a little bit more contemporary Anglican church that I go to on Sunday morning.
Okay.
Um, so for me personally, I get great community because I'm plugged
Yeah.
into two church bodies, so it's great.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Um, so that helps a ton. I actually, I gotta be careful. I think I would prefer to live in an environment where if a person identified as Christian, they were a practitioner.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Rather than faith by association or culturally, that's what good people do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, yeah, I'd always heard that like Portland, Seattle, just kind of up in those areas. I rodeoed with a lot of guys from up there,
Okay.
and not in those cities,
Right.
but from Washington State and from Oregon.
Hmm.
Um, and they talked about a lot about, they were Christians, but they talked a
Yeah.
lot about the culture up there and that. So cool. So the other option, second option too, is so you know the old tried and true saying, "Cuss like a sailor."
Yeah.
Cuss like a sailor. I've always had this idea, this
Well,
stigma. Different branches kind of are known for different things, but with the sailors, the Navy, that stigma is just kind of wild. Uh,
yeah.
I did spend a lot of time in San Diego. I rodeoed all through Southern
Okay.
California,
Yeah.
and all of those towns in between LA and San Diego, and then all of the suburbs out around there over to Arizona, um, and up to Nevada and that. So in and around San Diego and even south of there down to Mexico was around a lot of sailors.
I would
Um,
imagine. Yeah.
how much of the cuss like a sailor, the kind of wild, you know, rough and tumble kind of stigma, how much of that is real, is valid? And then how do you, how old are you now? 20.
24.
So as a 24-year-old young man, highly educated and trained, but then navigating this world as a 24-year-old young man between practicing your faith, but then you're a sailor. What is that ebb and flow and tug of war like through the different, whether it be at the academy or after the academy, different places? What's that like? A, is the stigma valid? I think I know the answer to that. B, what is that tug of war? What does that look like in your own
Yeah.
life?
Um, yeah, the stigma is certainly valid. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, people cuss all the time, and then yeah, I mean, talk about like the drunken sailors. Like this actually like kind of frustrates me. Like we'd pull into like Japan or Australia. Like I'm trying to go like let's go learn about the country. Like let's figure out like where we're at. And people are just like, nah, I just want to go to the bars. It's like, oh my gosh, like are you serious? Like
Hmm.
you got all this that you want to do, and you just want to go get drunk? Like
Hmm.
what?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think the stigma's pretty valid in my opinion. I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting, but
Hmm.
um, yeah, and trying to how do I live amongst this as a Christian and just kind of like someone that's not really about that. I guess like counterculture, maybe um, for like if we're speaking specifically to that stigma, like cussing and drinking and stuff, it's just like you just don't do it. I don't know. Like I never really made it a point. Like I would never approach people and be like, I'm making it my mission to like not cuss.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
I just wouldn't cuss, and people would notice. Like people would
Hmm.
just like the sailors that I would lead would come up after a while and be like, "Sir, like we're gonna get you to cuss one day," and I'm like, I don't know why that's a goal of yours, but like, and, like I never told them we'd never have this conversation, but it was just
Yeah,
something that they noticed and picked up on.
yeah.
Um, and so I think like that is maybe it speaks for itself. It's kind of a
Hmm.
testimony. Like I didn't do anything. I didn't have to say anything. In fact, it
Hmm.
was me not saying certain things that like
Yeah,
clued them in to the lifestyle that I was living. Um, and so yeah, and that was also different even at the academy too. Is people go to the Naval Academy like, all right, now I have to act like a Marine or like a sailor. And it's
hmm,
like, well, like I'm not like there's certain things like I don't want to cuss. I don't want to drink. Um, besides a drink or two here and there, right? But I'm not
sure.
like
Right.
that's not. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's just kind of a like you just don't do it, and people will notice that, and they'll take notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that again answers the question, but
Of course it does. It makes me think of that, and the Saint Francis of Assisi quote that I
okay,
mean, you've heard it till your ears bleed, but preach always and when necessary, use
yes,
words,
yeah,
I mean, just be a stand-up human,
yeah,
and people, for some reason, they notice.
hmm
And that's, yeah, awesome, dude. So those were that was kind of this kind of two pronged question that came up kind of in the intro. So,
okay.
what are your earliest remembrances of faith? Like, it's a big question. I know your
Yeah.
story. I know your family. I consider myself kind of an adopted member of your family.
It's
Um,
really fun.
so what are your earliest remembrances of a life of faith? What do you remember first?
There was, I guess, what I remember kind of, we can talk about like when you make your faith your own
Mm-hmm.
versus like your family's, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the earliest instances of kind of interacting with the Bible and the church and kind of a family of faith was, um, when we were all kids and we'd sit down for family devotionals at night or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dad had he had one of those children's Bibles, but it was like a scratch and sniff or something. Like it had photos and they were scratch and sniff, and so we would
Yes.
just like huddle around dad, and he'd be like, "All right, like let's scratch
Yes.
whatever Bible story it is," and he'd hold it up for every one of us to like get a whiff of the Bible.
I love it.
Um, so that's a cute story. Um, but I guess maybe earliest instances of me really like taking charge of my faith and
Mm-hmm.
kind of remembering that um, was probably in youth group, right,
Mm-hmm.
when I was with you and my siblings, and I don't, maybe necessarily not one instance, but I
Sure.
mean, there was big stuff, right? My first year,
Oh yeah.
yeah, big stuff, yeah, that's what it was called.
It was.
um,
Yeah.
Going to big stuff, and I remember raising my hand to go up to the front and
Mm-hmm.
being saved, and um, but then just coming back and weekly at whether at Wednesday night supper or at Sundays, and just um, I look back on it now and I kind of laugh, but I remember looking at my Bible at some point and like everything was highlighted, and I'm like, well, at that point, nothing's highlighted because you just highlighted the whole page.
Yeah.
That was kind of like just me as a 13, 14-year old was just like couldn't get enough of the Bible. I just wanted to highlight everything and underline it all, and
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, I think those are talking about the earliest memories of faith. That's probably it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that of the four of you, I mean, I see threads of Terry and Tracy in all of
Hmm.
you. It's
Yep.
it's impossible not to. But of the four of you, you are most like your dad.
Thank you.
Um, and that's an incredible compliment. I mean, people who knew Terry will understand that, but folks that don't, it's an incredible compliment. So it doesn't surprise me that your entire Bible was highlighted. Uh, that dude, that dude was spooky smart, and loved Jesus, and those two things don't always go together. Um, so spiritually speaking, what have been some of the pivotal moments, like different phases or ages, stages? What have been some of the pivotal moments like that kind of, it's easy to say, I'm a Christian or I believe in Jesus or whatever, but when the rubber meets the road, and I was there in person for a lot, some of those. I was there virtually on the phone or text or something for some of those. What have been some of the kind of rubber meets the road moments where it's like, okay, am I actually gonna trust in this? Am I actually gonna apply this and fall back on my belief systems? Kind of those pivotal moments.
Yep.
Are there any of those you're willing to share? What are some of those at different ages and stages?
Yeah, I guess just quickly thinking about it, I think there's maybe four distinct stages, I guess. And the first one would just kind of be early childhood up till high school, right? Including the youth and everything in it, and kind of culminating right in senior year and just everything that has led up to that point. And then I would say my college experience was split in two, and this goes into that pivotal moment of when I was dating Carla, right? So was not a Christian. She would go to church with us when she was here in high school. But I don't know if it was maybe when she was here, she seemed pretty open to it and was willing to engage. And she went back to Germany, and I don't know if it was something that I did, an interaction that we had, or her just going back to a pretty secular country. I don't know what it was, but she went back and then just kind of changed. It was, not violent against it, but it was just very much like against Christianity.
Yeah.
And she's one of those smart people that you just mentioned. Sometimes intellect and faith doesn't really connect all the time.
And delightful.
So I mean,
I really enjoyed Carla.
What's that?
Intellectual, like incredibly smart, but delightful. I enjoyed getting to know Carla. But anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. Yeah, it was a blast getting to know her. But and just between wrestling with her and kind of her questions on faith, and at the time when I was at the academy, I was taking like an ethics class that was talking about different philosophies and stuff, and so there came a point about halfway through my sophomore year that I was kind of like, you know what, like I'm just gonna give it all up. I don't really care anymore. Like God, like yeah, he might exist. Like I don't really care. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. And what was really fascinating, really cool was like the next day, like I remember going to bed that night just being like, you know what, like just screw it. I'm just done. And I woke up and I went and checked my mail, and I had received a book from my mom called Irresistible: Reclaiming the Faith of the Apostles.
Wow.
And I remember like, I don't know if I called her or I texted her, but I was like, Mom, like, why did you send me this book? And she's just like, oh, I was just at like a women's conference, and they talked about this book, and I just, felt like I should send you this book. And after that, I was like, what I said last night, that can't be true. Like this has to be something real.
Yes.
And so that kind of was the flip of a pivotal moment, So my first half of college was really trying, and challenging, and whole new environment, whole new culture. Kind of as you're saying, I'm surrounded in Georgia. I'm surrounded by my fellow Christians, and now I'm in a college that, like, it's college. People are ready to party and do some crazy stuff. And so I have that moment, and junior year rolls around. I'm a counselor at like a Christian camp. I start a Bible study with my best friend now. And that's when, recovering from my relationship with Carla, and things just kind of start like rolling now. We're getting to work on our faith. And then this final stage has probably been out of the academy. How do I navigate my faith life as an adult while I'm alone out on the ship in the Pacific Northwest, where Christians are the minority? So those are, I guess, the four stages, and I'm obviously still in the last one.
Yeah.
and the one probably pivotal moment in college.
So are you single?
Yes, yeah.
So how does this is unique to you. It's the first time it's come up in 28 episodes. What's that like? 24 years old, a practitioner of the Christian faith, got all your stuff together, on a career track. Um, what's that like being 24 years old, single, practitioner of the Christian faith? Like, what does that look like? How difficult is
Yeah,
that?
it's pretty tough. Yeah, I won't lie. So coming out of the academy and going on deployment and being alone, I really wrestled um, with what I thought was depression. Like I thought
Hmm.
I was depressed.
Hmm.
And after like months of just wrestling with myself, I had a therapist that I was going to for a little bit.
Hmm.
I really just came to realize like I'm lonely. And once I realized that, then I knew how to combat it. You know, I knew how to challenge the
Hmm.
feelings of loneliness. Um, so first step was for me to get a roommate. I mean, that was being by myself is just not a good time.
Yeah,
So I got a roommate who's not a Christian, but he and I get along really well.
great.
Um, and then, still kind of trying to figure out like, all right, what does it look like to be single? Um, then I actually uh, last summer met a girl. We started dating in August, and then in November we broke up, which was shattering for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so to really get to the heart of the question, I just remember sometime in December or January, and I go to church, and I don't know how it is for you. I don't know what you've experienced, but for me, I see a lot of single young Christian women, and I don't
Huh.
see a lot of single young Christian men.
Oh yeah, that's because they're in the bars. There or the ones.
Yeah.
It, I don't know how to say that, but you know what I'm saying.
Hmm. And so, newly single, I'm, upset and sad
Hmm.
that we broke up, and I just remember going to church and being like, Lord, like where are the single Christian men role models that can like lead me and guide me in this new experience
Mm,
of life?
mm.
And um, I can't remember who I was talking to. I was debating this for a while, but I was talking to someone. They're like, "No, this is definitely God." Uh, but the thought just came to me that was like, "Hey, like you are that single Christian man to like
You're the
lead.
guy.
Yeah, like
Yes.
you're the guy." Um, and so then I was like, "Oh, I'm the guy." Like
I'm the guy.
yeah, I'm the guy. Like let's do it. And
Oh, I love
so
it.
yeah, it's since I mean it's definitely been a challenge, especially as I'm traveling a lot right now. But it's just been
Oh,
kind of
so
this
good.
journey of like growing into who I am, being okay
Yeah.
with being alone, just being okay with being myself, whether that's
Yeah.
going to walk in the garden or reading a book
Yeah.
or getting involved in ministry at a church, like whatever that looks like, is just really like being content and diving into faith, and it's just
Hmm.
me and God, and diving in there. So I think that is what it's really been my experience as a single 24-year-old practicing Christian. Um, sorry, I got a spam call. Yeah, that's what it's been for me is
Yeah.
just trying to grow into myself,
Hmm.
um, and stop looking inwards and like trying to point out the holes in me or try to fix me, but like let's go look for the other men that maybe are
Hmm.
struggling, or the other
Hmm.
22-year-old that's in my position 2 years ago who's having a hard time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
you're the guy. Yeah.
yeah,
And the other thing I want to offer, Nat, before we move forward, and we'll lighten up. If y'all are listening, we're fixing to lighten up, so don't like click stop. Um, This is gold, dude. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
But before we move past this, knowing your mom the way that I do, um, I mean, for years, she was one of the closest friends that I
Mm-hmm.
had.
Yeah.
Um, I can assure you, she has been praying for your mate
Mm-hmm.
since before you came weeping into this world. And so, anybody that comes and goes, we just trust that's not the woman that she's been praying over. Um, and when the woman that she has been praying over comes on the scene,
Yeah.
I better get an invitation to the wedding. If not, I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to
Absolutely.
choke you out.
Of course.
Anyway, all right. So lighten up. I promise to lighten up. So this is fun. Two parts.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the people who have made a lasting impact on you?
Mm-hmm.
And what are some of the favorite stories, some of the good, funny, or favorite stories surrounding those people?
Yeah. I think just so you know, I think my computer's having a hard time connecting. So if I'm just silent for a bit, I think it's because we're just connecting there. Um, but obviously, one has been you.
Yeah,
You've
yeah, yeah.
played a huge part, especially in my foundation, right?
Sure.
And so this isn't necessarily a faith story or anything. You probably remember this story once I started saying it. It's must have been I was either in eighth or ninth grade, so I'm 13 or 14, and we're at some retreat, and I had brought like a soccer ball with me,
Hmm.
and it's like nighttime. I'm pretty tired, so I'm like in bed. And this was, I was young. I was like really possessive of my things, and people were like throwing my soccer ball around, and I'm like, oh my gosh, guys, like, come on, like I'm trying to go to bed, like give me my stuff back. And but they were going all around, and I think you come in and you like shut off the lights, and you're like, all right, everyone, like go to bed. And I like fell asleep like instantly, and I wake up. I don't know what time it is, and I thought it was like 9, and I had like missed breakfast, but it's pitch black. And I like scramble out of bed, and what I thought I was saying was, I gotta find the door. Like, where's the door? But what I ended up saying was, I gotta find my ball. Where is my ball? And so I'm like feeling around the room, and I feel like this. I don't know what it is, like a hand or maybe like a knob or something. And I'm like, what? Like, and you like shine a flashlight. Like I had woken you up, and you like shine a flashlight at me, and I'm dazed because I just got this bright flashlight in my eyes, and you're like, "See, like what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Gotta find the door, or I gotta find my ball." And you were just like, "Go back to bed, Stephen." And so I just turn around and I go back to bed.
I
I don't
don't
know if you
remember
remember that
that at
story, but
all. Zero.
oh man, I
That's
remember that. That's one of my favorite stories to tell between you and me. Um,
wow.
yeah.
That's
So,
awesome. Of all the things I do remember about you, I don't remember that.
huh. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's obviously not like a faith or spiritual story, but that's
Yeah.
funny interaction that I had with you.
Yeah. I bet you that would have been like Camp Lee or one of those.
I think so.
If I was sleeping in a room or in a cabin with some of our guys, that would have been one of
Yeah,
those fall retreat or spring retreat, I bet.
yeah. The other, let's see, some other really impactful people in my life have been
Hmm.
um, in college. I did crew in college. I don't
Hmm.
know if you're familiar with
Oh yeah.
crew. The
Yeah.
leader there, his name is Kyle. I still keep in touch with him. I was actually I went up to Annapolis 2 weeks ago, and I stayed with him.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I keep in touch with him.
Awesome.
I mentioned Keith, the chaplain for my ship.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of some stories, but um, my best friend Dylan, um, we met. He's a Marine. He's on deployment right now in Japan.
Mm.
But we're same class year. We knew each other freshman and sophomore year, but we really got close going into junior year because we pretty much hung out like all summer. We just had the same trainings.
Mm-hmm.
When I told you I was a counselor at that Christian camp, he was
Yeah.
the other. There were only two of us, and it was him and I.
Okay.
And so we hung out that whole time, and then when we led Bible studies, he was my co-leader. And so just everything kind of lined up, and we stayed close together. And yeah, I mean, so he's been impactful, maybe not from like a mentor standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
but just from a constant community and friend that I
Mm-hmm.
can lean into, and we'll send each other like scripture and stuff. He's a real avid reader, and so he'll
Okay.
read all these like theology books, and he'll send stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, he's been pretty impactful in my life too.
Amen, man. Any funny stories or any stories at all with Keith,
Let's see for
or just the fact that he was there and
with
consistent?
Keith. Yeah. I'm trying to think with Keith. This isn't necessarily a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
This is just something that I felt so terrible about. He was really gracious for it, but it was coming up. So we were on deployment, and it covered Easter. It covered Easter time, and so Keith had. Normally we just meet in like a classroom size, is about 20 people, but Keith had worked it out for Easter service. We were going to meet on the mess decks, like in the where everyone eats.
Okay.
And so he had, gotten everything set up, and I told him I'd wake up early Sunday morning and go help him set up and get everything ready. And I can't remember what time I had watch, but Sunday is the one day I'm on deployment. It's like the one day I can sleep in.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I mean, this is a really funny story, but I just remember like I think I like woke up, and it was one of those instances where you're just like, oh my gosh, like I'm late. And I like bust out, I like throw on my uniform, and I like sprint down to the mess decks. I didn't miss service, but I think I had like 10 minutes to go, and I just ran up to Keith, and I'm like, Keith, like I am, like it was just him and I. We were the only two that were going to help set up, and I just remember coming up and like, Keith, like I am so sorry. And he was like, I could tell that he was, frustrated. Obviously, he was having to set up like all by himself, but he is a very like understanding and gracious guy, and he's just like, Steven, just go grab the pulpit. Like I just need you to go get the pulpit real quick. And so that was, not a funny story, but I just
Yeah.
remembered, the one thing, the one day, the biggest day for us
Yes.
Christians, I
Yeah.
sleep in late. So that was kind of crushing for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So here are my notes. The next thing, kind of two more questions, and then we'll wrap up. One is, what have been your biggest hurdles in practicing your faith? What so far, 24 years is a very small sample size, but what have been some of
yeah.
the largest hurdles?
Mm. Mm. That is a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
Most,
If you want to process that, can you process while you're answering another question or not?
yeah. Try me.
All
Let's
right,
see.
this will be great. So you can process what's been the biggest hurdles, because this
Okay.
other one's a layup.
Okay.
What role has community played in your spiritual development?
Okay. That's actually a good question because I don't know, and this will answer the one that you just asked. I don't know if
Okay.
community has necessarily been my toughest hurdle,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly has been the most important aspect.
Okay.
I mean, you mentioned me being a social person. And yeah, I mean, that's true. I realize, hey, I'm not depressed. I'm just lonely, and I really need to lean into people.
Yes, that's
Um,
gold,
so,
dude. Yeah.
and so everywhere that I go, especially in like when I first showed up to Everett, I think that first week I was there, I think I like went to one church, but it was just kind of like big mega church, which, is, I guess, fine for some people, but not really the fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by the next week, I had found the church that I still go to.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's when I show up somewhere new, that's really the first thing that I'm going. But like before I start looking for hikes or before I start looking for a hobby or something,
Mm-hmm.
if like I don't really look for anything else until I find a church that I'm really happy going to,
Mm-hmm.
and that I can grow in and not just be fed, but also feed others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been probably the most important, and connecting with the chaplain, right? Like when I found out that we had a chaplain coming with us on deployment, I mean, that was like, I beeline to the chaplain pretty much as soon as he was on board, and I like learned his
Mm-hmm.
name and everything. And when I see other chaplains around the base, I'm like, let me get your name. Like, let me figure out your background. Let me tell you some of mine. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
community's really been probably the most important. Um, and I guess very thankfully, and I'm blessed that it shows up in my life. Because, yeah, I mean, I love keeping in touch with people. I love sending a
Yeah.
text every now and then and keeping in touch because it's just so important to me that, maintaining Christian friendships especially is
Yeah.
super important.
And
And so,
it's in your DNA.
mm, yeah.
I mean, there's no way around it. The
Mm,
the the social side, the serving side, the sincerity,
mm,
the community, especially like authenticity. The one thing that I loved, and I said this in Brian's episode, I believe, but the one thing that I loved and appreciated most about the home that you were raised in is
yeah.
everybody was welcome.
Yeah.
And there
Absolutely.
was no like parentheses, there was no subtext. It was just
Yeah.
like everybody was welcome and accepted and loved. And there was a reason why every time I rolled up into y'all's house, there was freaking 25 smelly teenagers piled into, a den, whatever, playing games or watching movies or doing whatever. It's
Yeah.
it's who you are. That the social side, the service. I'm the older I get, the more I'm convinced this world is made up of two kinds of people: givers and takers.
Mm,
Um, I have seen takers become givers,
yeah.
but I can't think of a time where I've seen givers become takers.
Really.
Yep. And giving is in your DNA. It's just who you are. It's literally in your name. I mean that's kind of what you all do. So
Yeah.
awesome, dude. So every episode, often I forget this, and then people send me funny texts, but I end every episode by asking you how you keep things simple. So, young dude, lot going, leader of people, two churches, trainings, deployments, a foreigner living in a foreign land. How in the world do you simplify? How do you come back to that kind of home base?
Yeah. I think, well, not, I think, I mean, this is what I come back to every time. Um, when dad passed away, I want to say that we called and I shared a verse with you. And I think that one was Revelation 11:7 or 7:11, something like that. And it says something very similar to this. And this one's also from Revelation. Of course, I don't have it verbatim memorized, but it's Revelation 21:3 and 4. And it pretty much says like, uh, and there was a loud voice from the throne, and it said, "Behold, God will be among his people, and he will be their God, and they will be his people, and he will live among them. And no more will there be mourning or crying or death or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And I think I shared that with you when Dad died, and kind of the hope that it gave me for the new life in Jesus. And when I look at the world, just this weekend, Iran launched a bunch of missiles against Israel again, and the work that I do in the military is pretty stressful, and people are always like, "Oh, like this is the next big thing," like was something big going to go down? And when the world's just crazy, and when I'm overwhelmed and lost and anxious or stressed out or whatever it is, and death seems everywhere, and there's just chaos, and I can't make sense of the world. I always just think and remember that God is good and God is victorious, and no matter what, in the end, He will have the ultimate victory. And no matter whatever I feel on earth or whatever it is, but that's how I keep it simple, is that I know that in the end, God is victorious, and it wipes away all of my troubles.
Amen, man. That reset, just that foundation, that coming back to God is God and we are not.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is practicing the Christian faith. So for those of you out there that know Stephen, welcome to adult Lil Steve. For those of you out there that do not, now you understand why I say there's never been a moment that I haven't been proud of him. Stephen, thank you. Thanks so much, man, for making time, for coming on. And I really am proud of you. I say all the time, I believe in you, I'm proud of you, and I love you. And that is very, very true. So, I hope sometime maybe the stars align and we're in Warner Robins at the same time.
Hopefully so, yeah.
I know our family is usually there the week between Christmas and New Year's. So
keep that in mind.
If by chance you're there at Christmas or New Year's and you kind of foresee that, send me a message. I would love to hug your neck, man. Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Don't actually hang up. I'm just going to say goodbye for this recording, and then I'll tell you bye formally. Okay. See ya.
Okay. Sounds good. See you, Ben.